So in the previous video with this responsive text box, we used these nulls to control this stroke and linking it all to the text to make the stroke responding to the input text in the text box. We ended it with creating a very, very simple template in the Essential Graphics panel, but now let's jump into making this a more usable template. Let's say we want to give it some more control, some more options in the Essential Graphics panel. For example, we might want to add controls for the color. We might want to add controls for the padding. We might want to add some animation. We'll get into that now. So first, we can start with the padding. So whenever I add controls to my templates, I like to use a adjustment layer where I place all my controls. So in this case, if you start with the padding, you can use a slider expression control, which we just call padding in here. You can already just drag that into the Essentials graphics panels. And we want the left and right property to be controlled by the padding. Obviously now nothing happens when I drag this slider. So if we open up these expressions again, what we have to start with is to add a reference to the padding slider. So it's like l.right+p equals pick width to the slider, semicolon. And for the left side, we would like this point to move this direction to the left. So that means we have to do minus padding on this one. And for the right one, we add left side plus the width plus the padding, like that. Oops. Of course, here we got a warning because I forgot to add this reference, of course, telling the expression what p means. So like that. So now if we try to drag the slider, you see that the padding is working nicely. But we also might want to add some padding to the top and bottom, because now it's just going left and right. It doesn't really look great when it's very wide. So let's keep it to 0. And let's close these, keep this one open, and then we'll go back to down to the stroke. Let's call it stroke. And we'll locate the stroke property in here. And I'll unclick the stroke width, which is what we would like to be controlled by the padding. So again, we have to tell this expression what or where we can find padding. So p equals pick width up to the slider, which is padding, semicolon, and then we say that the stroke width is the current stroke width. Current stroke width plus, we could just do plus p, but what happens then is that we get it, to my taste, the top and bottom gets very, very high. So what I've found is that it looks best if you do put in brackets and then you put p divided by 4. So then if I add, for example, 100 in here, then we get 100 extra pixels on this side, 100 on this side, but only 25 on bottom and 25 on the top. And to me that looks better. But let's keep it at 0 for now. And let's add another controller for a drop shadow. Find a drop shadow effect here, add it to the stroke. And let's give it some proper distance. Angle it down a bit. And obviously here, if you want to do it the easy way, which we don't, we could obviously just drag in, for example, the opacity from this one into here, and then you can control the opacity of your drop shadow like that. But personally, especially if I hand over my templates to others, for others to use, then I prefer having the control so people can't end up using my templates like in a way that looks bad, let's say. So for this one, I think maybe what looks good is a 35% opacity. And so I only want to give the option of using that or not using the drop shadow at all. So to do that, I'll go up to the effects panel again, and I'll find the checkbox controller. I drag it into the control layer. And let's call that, let's see, click here, enter, there, enter, drop shadow. I drag it into here, and obviously now controls nothing. I have to add an expression to the drop shadow effect I decided. So then I'll locate the drop shadow on the stroke and the opacity here. I alt click and I make a if else expression. So I say if brackets, I pick whip up to the drop shadow checkbox. If this one equals 1, which means on. If it's off, it's 0. So if it's on, then I want it to be at 35%, and if not, else it should be 0. Semicolon. And look at that. Now it's off, on, off, on, off, on. Beautiful. And we might also want to add some color controls in here. Here you could obviously you can make, you can go very fancy, make set color schemes that can be used. If you have a lot of elements in your composition, you might want to add some fill effects to the control panel or to the control layer, which in turn controls the other layers. But because now we only have the text and the stroke, I think it's fine to just drag in the properties from those directly. So I'll just go down to the stroke here, I'll find the stroke color. I drag that up into the essential graphics panel and I'll call that stroke color or background color. Makes more sense. And because text obviously doesn't have a color layer, we'll have to do that with a fill effect. So I'll find the fill, drag it in, let's make it black instead of that horrible red. I'll find that color and I'll drag it in to the essential graphics panel. Text color, we'll call it. So now if I open up my testing composition again, and I, for example, go in here, we can see that it's now updated. We don't only have the text we can edit, but we can also edit the padding, the drop shadow of on and off. We can change the color freely to something really ugly if we want to, and that's up to us. But what we are lacking is an animation, of course. So let's go back and fix that. We can go quite simple with this one. So I think we can do a trim path on the background. So when it's animated in, it should look like this, 0% to 100%, and it should start at 50-50. Just like that. And the text, to follow that motion, we can just add a simple text animation with the opacity. We set it to 0. Again, at the end it should be 0 to 100. We start at 50-50. And in the advanced settings here, we go to set the mode to subtract, not subtract, like that. Or beautiful. We add some easy ease and crank up this graph. Let's look at that. Looks good. And let's just, we can actually shorten down this composition quite a bit. Let's shorten that to 2 seconds. So we just copy over these keyframes, right-click Keyframe Assistant and Time Reverse keyframes, drag it to the end. So now it looks like this. In and out. So now if we go to the testing composition, this one also animates in and out. The only issue here is that you can't really change the duration. If you change it to a shorter duration, then it just cuts off. But there is a nice tool for this inside of After Effects, which is under the composition, responsive design, and create intro. Let me press U again to open up the keyframes we have to make sure that we drag this intro all the way to cover all the keyframes. And then I'll add one outro as well, like that and like that. So what this does is that it protects all the animations, all the keyframes inside this light blue area, but everything in between can be dragged, or the interpolation between this and this can be changed, but these and this is always protected. So if we go into the testing again and I drag in the text box, now this one also has this light blue. So you see it animates in, animates out. But if I drag it to be 6 seconds long, it still animates in, it stays there, animates out. And this also works inside Premiere Pro if you export it as a motion graphics template. So again, let's have a look at it. We can size it up like a normal layer. We can open the essential properties, add new text. We can give it some extra padding. We can turn off the drop shadow. And we can give it new color on the text and new color on the background, as we wish. And it still works with the animation. Look at that. In, and it animates out again. So that's how I make my responsive text boxes for use inside of After Effects projects, but also for use in Premiere, exported as a motion graphics template.